Mabel Pike placed 6 empty flour sacks on Gideon Mercer's kitchen table at 4 in the morning and walked out the door without making a sound. No note, no goodbye, no tears. Just 6x1 for every month she had cooked his meals, cleaned his house, fixed his books, nursed his sick ranch hands, raised his brother, and rebuilt everything a grief-broken man had let fall apart and beside them. A handwritten ledger showing $30 he had promised her and never paid. The stove was cold, the apron was gone, and Mabel Pike was already on the road. If that opening just stopped your breath, you are exactly where this story needs you to be. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell right now so you never miss a single story on this channel, and drop a comment below telling me what city or state you're watching from tonight, because I want to see how far Mabel's story travels. Now let's go back 6 months to the morning she first arrived at Mercer Ranch with 1 suitcase. Very little money and no idea she was walking into a house that would take everything she had and call it kindness. The cold hit her first. Not the October air outside, she was already dressed for that. Coat buttoned to the throat, scarf tucked in at the collar, the way her mother had taught her, before her mother stopped being someone who taught her things. It was the cold of the kitchen itself, the specific cold of a room where no fire has been built, where no warmth has been made deliberately, where someone expected warmth to simply exist without anybody choosing to create it. Mabel stood in the center of Gideon Mercer's kitchen at 4 in the morning and looked at that cold stove for a long moment. Then she set the 6 flour sacks on the table, one at a time, in a careful row. Then she set the ledger beside them, folded once, her name written on the outside in her own neat hand. $30 itemized by month with dates, and the words wages promised and wages unpaid written at the top of each column, and a total at the bottom underlined twice, so there was no misreading it. She looked around the kitchen one last time. At the cast iron skillet she had seasoned back to usefulness from the rusted neglect she had found it in. At the shelves of preserving jars she had filled from a garden she had grown from bare dirt. At the apron hook beside the pantry, where her apron had hung every morning for 6 months. Already gone now, already packed, because she was not leaving that behind. She picked up her suitcase. She opened the door. She walked out into the cold October dark without looking back once. Because she had learned a long time ago that looking back was how a woman talked herself out of the right decision. The stage road was 2 miles east. She had timed it. She walked, 300 yards behind her, inside the house. 11-year-old Tobias Mercer sat straight up in bed. He could not have said what woke him. The ranch was quieter than usual. And that was the thing. That was exactly the thing that wrong about it. Because Tobias had lived in this house long enough to know that 4 in the morning was not supposed to sound like this. 4 in the morning was supposed to smell like wood smoke and hear like the distant hiss of the kettle starting to think about boiling. 4 in the morning, at Mercer Ranch, for 6 months now, had meant Mabel. He listened, no fire, no kettle, no soft humming from the kitchen below. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before he finished the thought. He took the stairs fast and pushed the kitchen door open and stopped. Cold stove. Empty table except for 6 flour sacks and a folded piece of paper. No apron on the hook. No, Tobias said to no one. To the empty kitchen. To the cold air and the 6 flour sacks and the particular quality of silence that meant something had already happened and he was too late to stop it. He grabbed the paper off the table and read every line of it twice. His hands not entirely steady. Then he ran upstairs and hammered on his brother's door with both fists. Gideon, wake up right now. A creak of bed springs. A long pause that meant Gideon was deciding whether this was worth his attention before sunrise. Boy, if this is about the barn cat again, I swear to. Tobias hit the door again. Mabel's gone. She took her suitcase. Gideon opened the door. Silence on the other side. Then the sound of boots hitting floorboards. The door opened. Gideon Mercer looked the way he always looked when something had gone wrong that he hadn't prepared for, jaw tight. Eyes moving fast, the particular stillness of a man whose first instinct was to assess before he reacted. He looked at Tobias. He looked at the paper in Tobias's hand. He took it. He read it. His face did not change. That was the thing about Gideon, his face almost never changed. Which Tobias had spent 11 years learning to read. And what he was reading right now underneath the stillness was something he had not seen on his brother's face in a very long time. Something that looked like fear. "Where's she headed?" Gideon said. "Stage Road," Tobias said. "She had a letter from a boarding house in Wichita. $8 a month in a private room. Guaranteed in writing." He paused. "Unlike some arrangements." Gideon looked at him. "She's been gone maybe an hour," Tobias said, "maybe less. She walks fast, but the stage doesn't run until 6:30. If you rode now." Tobias stared at him. "Gideon," I said, "go back to bed, Tobias. You are going to ride after her." It was not a question. Tobias said it the way he said most things to his brother, flatly. Without performance, stating the fact he intended to make real. "You are going to ride after her, and you are going to pay her what you owe her, and you are going to ask her to come back. And if you are thinking about not doing that, I need you to stand right here and explain to me how this house runs tomorrow morning without her. Because I genuinely cannot picture it, and I have been trying for the last 4 minutes." Gideon looked at his 11-year-old brother in the dim hallway. "Go back to bed," he said for the third time, but something in his voice had shifted. He went downstairs. Tobias heard the front door open and close. Heard boots cross the porch. Heard the barn door. He sat down on the top step of the staircase. In the dark, and waited. He was good at waiting. Mabel had told him once that patience was not the same as passivity, that waiting with intention was one of the most powerful things a person could do. He had written that down in his notebook. He wrote down most things Mabel said. Because he had learned early that she was the kind of person whose words turned out to be more true the longer you kept them. He sat on the step, and he waited, and he thought about the notebook. Mabel had been walking for 40 minutes when she heard the hoofbeats. She did not slow down. She did not speed up. She adjusted the handle of her suitcase from her right hand to her left because her right hand was going stiff in the cold. And she kept her eyes on the gray line of the stage road ahead of her. And she breathed evenly, and she told herself that whatever was coming up behind her, she had already made her decision, and it was the right one, and she was not going to be talked out of it by a man on a horse at 4:30 in the morning. The hoofbeats slowed, stopped. She heard him dismount. Heard the leather creak. Heard his boots on the packed dirt road. And the sound of his horse blowing air through his nose in the cold. Mabel. She had known he would say her name first. 6 months of watching Gideon Mercer operate had taught her his patterns. And his first pattern in any difficult situation was to name it or name the person at the center of it, as though naming a thing gave him some purchase on it. "The stage runs at 6:30. Mr. Mercer," she said. Without turning. Her voice was steady. She had been practicing steadiness for 6 months, and she was very good at it by now. "If you've come to renegotiate the terms of employment, I should tell you I've already signed an offer letter. $8 a month, my own room, wages paid on the 1st of every month. In writing. I know about the offer," he said. "Tobias found the letter in August," he told me. Another pause. I should have said something then. She stopped walking. She did not turn around, but she stopped. "You knew," she said. "Yes, you knew in August that I had a better offer. And you said nothing, and you still didn't pay me." She said it slowly. "Each piece of it separately, the way you lay out evidence in a row so nobody can claim they didn't see it." "Yes," he said. "No excuse, no explanation." She turned around. Gideon Mercer looked like a man who had ridden hard in the cold dark without stopping to think about whether he was dressed for it. His coat was half-buttoned. His hat had been pushed back by the wind and stayed there. He was holding his horse's reins in one hand and a coin purse in the other. And he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen Sissy face in 6 months, not rancher's stillness, not employer's distance, not the particular careful blankness he wore when something was hurting him, and he did not intend to let it show. He looked like a man who had run out of ways to pretend. "I came to pay you," he said. $30 owed. Plus 10 more, because what we agreed on was too low from the first week, and you and I both know it. Set it on the ground, she said. I'll collect it with my bag. Something moved across his face. Mabel. His voice dropped to something rougher than she was prepared for. Look at me, please. She was already looking at him. I'm looking, Mr. Mercer. I need you to stop. He pressed his mouth together. He tried again, and this time the words came out without the careful management he usually applied to them. I don't have a good reason for what I did. I have reasons that felt like excuses and now just feel like what they are. Which is a man who kept his housekeeper underpaid because some part of him figured that money in her hand was money she could leave with. Mabel went very still. So you kept what you owed me, she said. To keep me from having options. Yes, you turned my wages into a trap. His jaw tightened. Yes, and you saw me every month and you knew what you were doing. Yes, he said it without looking away. Whatever else Gideon Mercer was, he was not a coward when it came to being told the truth about himself. And she had to give him that, even now. Yes, I knew what I was doing. And I told myself it was because the ranch needed you. Which was true. And I told myself it was because Tobias needed you. Which was also true. And I told myself those things every month, instead of telling myself the actual true thing. Which was that I was afraid of what it meant that I needed you here, and I didn't know what to do about it. The morning was very quiet. In the direction of Briar Hollow, a single bird was reconsidering whether it was ready for dawn yet. Hold out your hand, he said. She held it out. He set the coin purse in her palm. It was heavier than expected, significantly heavier, and she curled her fingers around it and felt $40 press into her hand and felt something in her chest do a complicated thing she was not going to examine right now. Thank you, she said. She put it in her coat pocket. Come back, he said. No. You paid me what I was owed, she said. That is correct. That is what you should have done on the 1st of April. But paying a debt is not the same as changing what made the debt happen. She held his gaze. If I come back today, Mr. Mercer, what changes? You'll pay me on time. All right. But what else? He opened his mouth. Because here's what I want to know, she said. And now 6 months of careful steadiness was starting to crack at the edges. Not into tears, but into something harder than that. Something clear-eyed and unsparing. In 6 months in your house. You have told me the dairy channels needed cleaning. You have told me the smokehouse door needed new rope. You have told me Tobias needed boot leather and the preserving jars needed checking before winter. You have told me a very great many things that needed doing. But you have never once, her voice was quiet but absolutely level. Not once, Mr. Mercer. Not one single morning in 6 months. You have never asked me one thing about myself. He was quiet. You don't know how old I am, she said. You don't know where I grew up. You don't know what I was before I came to your ranch. You don't know what I wanted to be. You don't know what I'm afraid of. What I hope for, whether I like the prairie or find it lonely. You don't know what I think about when I'm making bread. You don't know what makes me laugh. She looked at him straight. In 6 months you watched everything I did and you never once tried to know who was doing it. That's not entirely true, he said. His voice was quiet. Then tell me what you know. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, you hum when you're content and go silent when something's wrong. You check the dairy equipment twice every morning because you don't trust what you haven't verified yourself. You save the best cream for Tobias's oatmeal and you think nobody notices. You read until the lamp oil gets low, and then you sit in the dark a little while rather than waste it. You corrected my cattle ledger 3 months ago. There was an error that would have cost me $200, and you fixed it without telling me. Because you didn't want me to feel foolish. He paused. You count every missed payment on the first of the month. You've been deciding for 6 months how long you'd wait. Mabel had gone very still. I watched you, he said. More than was fair to either of us. Probably. More than I had any right to given what I wasn't doing. He took a breath. And I know what you did every day. I know it down to the last entry in Tobias's notebook. What I don't know, what I never once asked, was who you were when you weren't doing any of it. And that's the part I can't fix by paying you $40 and asking you to come back. Something in her throat was tight. She would not let it show. It isn't. The sound of the stage was coming now. Still distant, still east, but moving. She could feel time contracting the way it did when a decision had been made, and the world was simply catching up to it. I have to go, she said. Let me ask you one thing. His voice had dropped. Just one. What do you want? He said. Not what you'll settle for. Not what's reasonable. What do you actually want, Mabel? What would it look like? If someone asked you and meant it, she almost couldn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because she had not been asked that question in so long that being asked it now felt like a door being opened in a room she had bricked shut. I want to be paid what I earn, she said, on the first of every month. In my hand. Not when it's convenient, not when the cattle sell. Not when you remember. She breathed. I want a room that is mine. I want a written agreement. I want to know in January what I'll have in December. I want to be treated as a professional, not as a fixture that came with the house. She met his eyes. And I want to matter to the people I give my work to. Not as labor, as a person, as someone with a name and a history and opinions and the ability to walk out a door when she has been taken for granted long enough. Gideon looked at her. You matter, he said. You should have said that in April, she said. When you paid me the first time, you should have put the wages in my hand and said it then. I know. You didn't. I know that too. The stage was visible now at the bend of the road. Moving toward them, the driver hunched against the cold on his seat. Mabel picked up her suitcase. I'll fix it. His voice came out fast. The way things come out when a man has been careful for a long time and suddenly stops. All of it, the wages, the contracts, everything on this ranch that runs the way it runs because I let it run that way. I will fix every part of it whether you come back or not. Because you're right, it needs fixing, and the reason it needs fixing has nothing to do with whether you're there to see me do it. She stopped. Not turned. Just stopped. You're not fixing it to get me back, she said. I'm fixing it because I was wrong, he said. And a wrong thing needs fixing. Whether it earns me something back is a different question. Those are two separate things, and I'm trying to learn to keep them separate. The stage pulled to a stop. The driver looked down at them with the incurious expression of a man who had witnessed 100 conversations that weren't his business. Briar Hollow and East, he called. You boarding? Ma'am? Yes, Mabel said. She handed up her suitcase. She put her foot on the step. Mabel. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn. I was surviving before you came, Gideon said. I know how to survive. I had forgotten there was something other than surviving, and I had convinced myself that was fine. A pause. It wasn't fine, I just didn't know that until it was. She climbed into the stage. She sat down on the inside bench, and she put her hands in her lap, and she felt the coin purse in her coat pocket, and she looked at the back of the bench in front of her, and she breathed. And she breathed. And she did not let herself think about the expression on his face until the stage had lurched into motion, and the sound of wheels on the road had swallowed everything else. She had $40. She had a signed offer letter. She had a private room waiting for her in Wichita, and her name on a written contract, and $8 coming on the first of every month like clockwork. Guaranteed. She had everything she had asked for. She pressed her hand against her coat pocket and felt the weight of the coin purse and closed her eyes and listened to the prairie moving past her in the cold October dark. Back at Mercer Ranch, Tobias was still sitting on the top step of the staircase when the front door opened. He heard one set of boots. He heard the door close. He heard his brother stop in the kitchen and stay there a long time without making any other sound. Then he heard something he had not heard from Gideon Mercer in 2 years. Since their parents died and Gideon had stood at the graveside with his hat in both hands and his jaw set so hard it looked like the effort was holding him together. He heard his brother sit down heavily in a chair and let out a long, slow breath that carried everything in it. Tobias came downstairs. Gideon was sitting at the kitchen table with the 6 flour sacks still in their careful row, and Mabel's ledger open in front of him, and his hands flat on the table on either side of it, looking at the numbers she had written in her neat columns. $30 itemized and dated and underlined twice. He looked up when Tobias came in. He did not say anything. Tobias sat down across from him. "She got on the stage," Tobias said. Not a question.
Yes, good.
Tobias looked at the flour sacks. "That should have been done in April. You knew in August she had a better offer." "Yes, and you still didn't pay her." Gideon said nothing. "I need you to hear something," Tobias said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his brown notebook, hand-stitched. Bought at the dry goods store with saved-up pennies, and he set it on the table between them. He did not open it. "I started keeping that in August. I wrote down everything she did that nobody noticed. Everything she did that wasn't in any arrangement you made with her. Every time she went past what she owed you and gave you something extra. Because she was the kind of person who gave more than she owed." Gideon looked at the notebook. He did not touch it. "Open it." Gideon opened it. He read in silence. His hands were still. The kitchen was very cold. The notebook was full, every page of it, in Tobias's careful, deliberate letters. 47 days of entries from August through October. Each one a small, precise record of something Mabel had done that nobody had thanked her for. August 3. Miss Mabel fixed the dairy cooling channel herself. She didn't tell Gideon she'd found the problem. She just fixed it. August 12. She covered my school books in brown paper from the flour sacks. She said waste was a sin she couldn't afford. She has no wasted inches anywhere. August 19. She sat up until 11 with Tommy Reardon when he had the fever. She was up again at 4 for the bread. She didn't mention either. August 24. She found an error in the cattle ledger that would have cost Gideon $200. She worked on it 3 nights. She corrected it and never said a word. September 9. She heard what Mrs. Albrecht said about her at the dry goods store. That she was a desperate, heavy woman who was lucky anyone had taken her on at all. She came back to the ranch and made supper and hummed while she did it, and I think that was the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. Gideon stopped at that entry. "Read it twice." "What did Mrs. Albright say?" he asked. "That she was lucky to have a roof," Tobias said. "That a woman like her ought to be grateful. That she was probably that people in town were saying she wasn't just the housekeeper." He said it plainly. "They said things, Gideon. In the store. In the street. They talked about her the way people talk about women, who they think don't have anywhere else to go." Gideon's expression went very still. "She heard it?" "She heard most of it," Tobias said. "She came home and made supper. She hummed." He looked at his brother. "She was too proud to let anyone see it land, but it landed. Every time." Gideon closed the notebook slowly. He put his hand flat on the cover. "She did all of this," he said. "Not a question. A reckoning." "She did all of this," Tobias said. "And you kept the ledger locked. And the town talked about her like she was nothing. And she stayed anyway, every morning, for 6 months. Because she was the kind of woman who finishes what she starts and keeps her word even when nobody else does." He paused. "And then she stopped, because dignity has a limit." Gideon said nothing for a long time. The kitchen was cold. The stove was cold. Outside the window, the Kansas morning was coming up pale and flat and enormous in every direction. The kind of prairie dawn that made a person aware of exactly how much empty space lay between where they were and everywhere else. Somewhere in that space on the stage road east, Mabel Pike was riding toward a life she had chosen for herself. "What do I do?" Gideon said. He said it quietly, without the particular defensive quality of a man who expected to already know the answer. Tobias looked at his brother across the table with 6 flour sacks between them and a cold stove behind him and a notebook full of 47 days of evidence of everything they had taken from a woman and never returned. "You fix it," he said. "Not because she might come back. Not because you want to earn something. You fix it because it's wrong, and you know it's wrong, and you're the one who made it wrong. You fix the wages. You fix the contracts. You fix the way every person on this ranch gets paid and treated. You fix every single thing you let run crooked because it was easier than running it straight." He paused. "And you do it quietly. And you do it correctly. You don't tell anyone you're doing it. And then you wait," Tobias said. "And you see if what you build is worth coming back to." Gideon sat with that. He looked at the flour sacks. He looked at the ledger in his brother's careful handwriting. He looked at the cold stove. He got up from the table. He went to the stove and built the fire himself badly. Fumblingly, because he had not done it in 6 months, and Mabel had made it look so effortless that he had simply stopped noticing it required effort. He burned 2 fingers getting the kindling to catch. He scorched the matchstick. He managed it on the 4th try. The flame caught. The stove began to warm. He stood in front of it with his scorched fingers and looked at what he had made. It was a poor fire. It smelled like someone who didn't know what he was doing. It would heat the kitchen in about twice the time Mabel would have needed. But it was warm. He went to his desk. He unlocked the drawer with the key he kept on his watch chain, the same key. On the same chain that had been there every month when the payment came due, and he had left it in his pocket and told himself next month, and he pulled out his ledger. Not the cattle ledger, the household ledger, the one he had not opened in 3 months. He sat down. He opened it to the first page. He began to read. He read for a long time. He read everything, every account, every wage, every commitment he had made and kept and made and not kept. He read the column of months beside Mabel's name, and the column of amounts beside that, and the column of payment dates that was empty for every single one. He picked up his pen. He did not write excuses. He did not write plans. He wrote a list, a plain, honest list of every debt he owed, every wrong thing he had let run wrong, every person on his land whose trust he had used without maintaining. It was a longer list than he expected. He wrote it all down. Outside the window, the Kansas morning spread itself out in every direction, gold and cold and indifferent and enormous. The kind of morning that did not soften itself for a man's mistakes and did not offer comfort and did not promise anything except that the sun would continue rising whether or not the people beneath it deserved it. Gideon Mercer sat at his desk with his pen and his ledger and his scorched fingers and the fire warming the kitchen behind him. And he wrote down everything that needed to be made right. He was going to fix it, not because she might see it, not because fixing it would earn him something back, because it was wrong, because she had been right, because $30 in an unlocked box was $30 he had chosen to withhold from a woman who hummed while she worked and covered a boy's school books in flour sack paper and sat up through the night with a sick ranch hand and heard what the town said about her and came home and made supper anyway. Because somewhere on the stage road east, at the edge of all that open Kansas sky, a woman with chestnut hair and quiet gray-green eyes and $40 in her coat pocket was riding toward a life she had built for herself, out of nothing. She had chosen it. She had earned the right to choose it. He had made sure she needed to. That was the part he would carry with him. Not that she had left, but that she had been right to. The stage to Wichita took 4 hours on a good road. Mabel did not sleep. She sat with her hands in her lap and her coat buttoned and the coin purse pressed against her ribs through the wool, and she watched the Kansas prairie move past the window in the gray October morning, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was the discipline she had developed over 6 of living in a house where thinking too hard about your situation made it impossible to do the work that kept you in it. She was good at not thinking too hard. She had gotten very good at it. The other passenger in the coach was an older man in a traveling coat who fell asleep before Briar Hollow and snored with the consistency a man who had made peace with himself long ago. Mabel envied him that. She watched him sleep and thought that there was something restful about a person who had stopped fighting whatever it was they used to fight. Though she could not have said exactly what she meant by that. She pressed her hand against the coin purse. $40. She had earned 30. He had given her 40. That extra $10 had been sitting in his pocket in his strongbox. Probably in that locked drawer with the key on his watch chain for months. Already calculated, already counted out, ready to be given to her whenever he decided to give it. He had known what it was worth. He had always known. That was the part she kept returning to, sitting in that cold stagecoach with the prairie going gray and gold outside the window. Not that he had underpaid her, not that he had withheld wages. Those things she had understood for a long time. What she was turning over now, for the first time, was the particular knowledge that he had understood the value of what she was doing while he was watching her do it. And he had kept that understanding to himself, like a man keeps a card he isn't ready to play. He had seen her. He had just never let her know he was looking. She did not know what to do with that. She took her hand away from the coin purse and put it in her lap and looked at the prairie and told herself it didn't matter. It didn't change anything. A man who understood your value and still withheld your wages was not a man who deserved credit for his understanding. She told herself that clearly, firmly, and with complete conviction. She almost believed it by the time the stage reached Wichita. The Whitmore boarding house was on a decent street 3 blocks from the main commercial road, a wide building with clean curtained windows and a front porch that someone swept regularly. And a woman named Mrs. Clara Whitmore, who met Mabel at the door with the particular efficient warmth of a woman who ran a tight establishment and liked people well enough to be kind to them without being soft about it. Miss Pike. She took Mabel's suitcase from her hand before Mabel could protest. Your room is ready. 3rd floor, east-facing, which means you get the morning light. I hope that suits you. It suits me perfectly, Mabel said. Supper is at 6, breakfast at 7. You are not required to attend either. But the food is good and the company is better than you'd expect, Mrs. Whitmore was already moving toward the stairs. Wages are paid on the 1st of each month. You will sign for them. I keep records. I appreciate that, Mabel said. I know you do, Mrs. Whitmore said, in the tone of a woman who had hired enough people to recognize one who had been burned before. That's why I put it in the offer letter. The room was small and clean and entirely hers. Mabel set her suitcase on the bed and stood in the middle of it for a moment. There was a window, a chair, a table with a lamp that actually had oil in it. A hook on the back of the door for her coat, a lock a proper one, with a key, which Mrs. Whitmore had pressed into her hand on the way up the stairs. She locked the door, she sat down on the bed. She put her face in her hands not to cry. Or not exactly, but because sometimes a person needs to stop presenting herself to the world for a moment and just be inside her own skull with the door closed. And she had not done that in 6 months. She had not had a door that locked in 6 months. She sat like that for a long time. Then she washed her face. She hung her coat. She put the coin purse in the bottom of her suitcase under her winter blouse where it was safe. She unlocked the door and went downstairs to learn the kitchen. At Mercer Ranch, the morning did not wait for anyone's feelings to settle. By 7:30, the ranch hands were in the kitchen doorway finding a cold stove and no biscuits, and a rancher standing at the stove with a scorched hand and a cast-iron skillet that was making a smell it had no business making. Mr. Mercer, Hank Reardon, the oldest of the hands, a lean, weathered man of 50, with the careful manners of someone who had learned that honest observation kept you employed longer than flattery, stepped into the kitchen and looked at the skillet. That's burning. I can see that, Gideon said. You want me to know? Hank retreated to the doorway. He looked at the 6 flour sacks still sitting on the table. He looked at the empty apron hook. He looked at Tobias, who was sitting at the table eating a cold biscuit left over from yesterday, with the patient expression of a boy who had decided the best contribution he could make this morning was to stay out of the way. Miss Mabel go somewhere? Hank asked. Wichita, Tobias said. When's she coming back? She's not, Tobias said. A silence in the kitchen doorway. Behind Hank, 2 other ranch hands, Pete Alderman and young Will Cosgrove, who was 17 and had developed a habit of showing up wherever Mabel's biscuits were, exchanged a look that communicated, without words, a shared understanding of how bad the next several mornings were about to be. Mr. Mercer, Hank said carefully, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but Miss Mabel has been— I know what she's been, Gideon said. She's been the reason this kitchen functions, Hank said, finishing the sentence anyway, because he was 50 years old and had earned the right to finish his sentences. She's been the reason a lot of things function. And I just want to say, on behalf of the men, that if there was some kind of if wages were if the arrangement wasn't, her wages are paid, Gideon said. He turned from the stove and looked at Hank directly. In full, with adjustment for what I underpaid from the start. Hank absorbed this. But she still left, he said. Another silence. Well, Hank said, in the tone of a man who understood more than he was being told, and had decided to respect the limits of what he'd been offered. That's a hard thing then. It is. He turned back to the stove. The skillet was still smoking. Hank stepped into the kitchen, moved Gideon firmly to one side with the gentle efficiency of a man who had worked cattle for 30 years and knew how to redirect a thing bigger than himself without making an issue of it, and took over the skillet. I'll do the cooking today, he said. But Mr. Mercer, with respect, you need to find a solution that isn't me. I know, Gideon said. He sat down at the table across from Tobias. Tobias pushed the plate of cold biscuits toward him. Gideon took one. He ate it without tasting it. He looked at the 6 flour sacks. He thought about what Tobias had said, fix it quietly. Fix it correctly. Don't tell anyone you're doing it. And he thought about the ledger open on his desk and the forced writing at 5 in the morning, while his fingers were still scorched. Tobias, he said. Yes, when did people in town start talking about her? Tobias did not look surprised by the question. September, he said, maybe earlier. But September is when I started hearing it clearly enough to write it down. What were they saying? Tobias was quiet for a moment. He looked at his cold biscuit. Then he said it plainly. The way he said most things, that she was a big woman with nowhere better to go. That she was lucky you'd taken her on. That she was— he paused, choosing words— that she wasn't just the housekeeper. That a woman like her, living in a widower's house, working for room and board— he stopped again. People made it ugly. Gideon. The way people do when they see a woman they think is easy to make ugly. Gideon's jaw had gone very tight. She heard it, he said, most of it. She never let anyone see it bother her. She'd come back and make supper and hum and not say a word. Tobias looked up at his brother. But I saw it. Every time she came back from town and was just a little quieter than she'd been when she left. I always knew. Gideon said nothing for a long. Then why didn't you tell me? Tobias looked at him steadily. Because I kept waiting for you to notice yourself, he said. I thought— I kept thinking you're not a stupid man. You're not a cruel man. I kept thinking you'd see it eventually and do something about it. I kept thinking you'd pay her and tell people she was your employee and not something they could whisper about. He paused. I stopped thinking that around September. And then you started the notebook. And then I started the notebook, Tobias said. Because I decided that if you weren't going to see it, I was at least going to write it down so it existed somewhere. Gideon looked at his younger brother across the table with the 6 flour sacks between them and Hank Reardon, making a creditable attempt at fried eggs behind them, and the morning fully up now over the Kansas prairie, cold and enormous and entirely indifferent. "I'm sorry," he said. He did not say it often. He said it now, with the particular care of a man who understood that the words were not enough and was saying them anyway because they were the only words available. Tobias looked at him. Something in the boy's face shifted, not softening exactly, but acknowledging. "I know," he said, "but I'm not the one you need to say it to. I know that too." Mabel spent her first week in Wichita learning the Whitmore boarding house the way she learned everything methodically. Paying attention, noting what functioned well, and what needed improving without saying anything about the second category until she understood the first one well enough to be useful. The kitchen was good. Mrs. Whitmore was an organized woman, and the supplies were kept properly and the equipment was maintained. Mabel had been afraid, coming in, of finding another household that had been allowed to deteriorate, and was expecting her to fix it, without acknowledgement. The Whitmore kitchen was not that. It was simply a working kitchen that needed a competent hand. And Mabel was a competent hand, and by Thursday of the first week Mrs. Whitmore had raised her monthly rate to $9 without being asked. "You reorganized my dairy supply without making me feel foolish about the way it was before, Mrs. Whitmore said, setting the amended agreement on the table between them. "That's a skill worth paying for." Mabel looked at the paper. $9, her name, the date. Mrs. Whitmore's signature on the line below hers. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. It's what the work is worth, Mrs. Whitmore was already standing, already moving back toward the front desk. "I'll want your signature on the amended agreement before supper." Mabel signed it. She folded her copy carefully and put it in the bottom of her suitcase with the coin purse. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands, at the particular roughness of them. The way her right palm had a callus exactly where a cast iron handle rested. The way her knuckles had cracked in the October cold every morning for 6 months before she had to use the balm she kept meaning to buy and kept not buying because she was not spending money on herself when she was not certain she had money to spend. She had money now. She went to the dry goods store on Friday and bought the hand balm and a new pair of work gloves and a small volume of poetry she had been meaning to read for a year. She spent 70 cents. She did not account for it to anyone. She walked back to the Whitmore with her paper parcel under her arm and the October wind at her back and something in her chest that it took her most of the walk home to identify. Because she was out of practice with it. It was lightness. Just lightness. The ordinary, uncomplicated feeling of a person who had purchased something she wanted with money she had earned and did not have to justify it to any living soul. She had not felt that in a very long time. Back in Briar Hollow, the town was talking. This was not new. Briar Hollow talked about everyone and everything, with the industrious thoroughness of a community that had limited entertainment and unlimited interest in its own affairs. But the departure of Mabel Pike from Mercer Ranch gave the town something particularly satisfying to work with, a story with visible characters. A before and after, and enough ambiguity about the specifics to make speculation both necessary and enjoyable. Mrs. Delaney at the dry goods store had seen Gideon ride past in the early morning and then return alone 2 hours later. And she had mentioned this to Mrs. Albright, who had mentioned it to 3 other women at the Wednesday gathering. With the result that by Thursday the general understanding in Briar Hollow was that the heavy woman from the Mercer Ranch had either been dismissed or had left under circumstances that did not reflect well on anyone. "I always said it was an odd arrangement," Mrs. Albright said, in the particular tone that meant she had not always said this, but had decided she had. A woman like that, living in a widower's home. You have to wonder what she thought was going to come of it. "She worked for him," said a younger woman named Ruth Hadley, who was the schoolteacher's wife and had spoken with Mabel twice at the dry goods store and found her sharp-minded and interesting. "She was his housekeeper. That's employment." "Well, Mrs. Albright said, in a tone that communicated that she considered Ruth Hadley's intervention both irrelevant and slightly naive. It was clearly not a sustainable arrangement. "I heard he rode after her, Mrs. Delaney said. "Rode out to the stage road. That's not how you see off an employee?" "No," said Mrs. Albright. It isn't. They considered this with the focused attention of women extracting maximum meaning from minimum evidence. Poor man, Mrs. Albright said eventually. Running after a woman like that. Ruth Hadley set down the bolt of fabric she was examining with a small, precise motion that communicated her feelings on the subject without requiring her to express them aloud, which she had learned was more effective in Briar Hollow than expressing them aloud. A woman like what, she said. A small Mrs. Albright said, I mean to say it was obvious she had very limited options. Women in her circumstances. She had an offer of employment in Wichita, Ruth said. $8 a month. She left for it. Well, clearly, she left because she was offered better, Ruth said. That's not desperation. That's sense. She picked up her fabric bolt. Though I expect sense is a harder thing to gossip about. She took her purchase to the counter and paid for it and left. And the silence she left behind her in the dry goods store had a particular quality that meant she had landed somewhere accurate, and everyone in the room knew it. Mrs. Albright recovered first. Gideon Mercer is going to regret that arrangement, she announced. To the general room. Mark my words. Gideon Mercer was already regretting a great many things. And he was not in the habit of marking other people's words. He had spent the 3 days following Mabel's departure doing something he had not done since taking over the ranch management at 26. Accounting honestly. Not the kind of accounting that kept the cattle records and the land costs in proper columns. The other kind. The kind that required a man to sit with a ledger that had no numbers in it and look at what was actually there. By Friday evening, he had written 2 letters of formal apology, one to Mabel's previous employer for a reference he now understood he had not deserved to give, and one to his feed supplier correcting an overcharge he had let stand for 8 months because addressing it had felt like more trouble than it was worth. He had posted a notice in the ranch hands' quarters stating that wages would be paid on the 1st of every month, in full with signed receipt, beginning November 1st. He had hired a proper cook, a capable widow named Mrs. Garfield, who arrived on Thursday, assessed the kitchen with the professional thoroughness of someone who understood her own value, named her price, and received it without negotiation. Because Gideon had learned, in the specific and painful way that lessons teach themselves, exactly what happened when you negotiated a capable woman down and then expected her gratitude. He had begun reorganizing the household accounts in the way Mabel's ledger had showed him they needed to be organized, not just cattle and land, but the living costs of a working ranch, line by line. Transparent, signed. He had not told anyone he was doing any of this. That was the part that surprised him about himself, how much easier it was to do the right thing when he stopped thinking about who might see him do it. He had spent years running the ranch partly as performance, Gideon Mercer. Reliable rancher, solid, fair employer, and the performance had become its own trap. Because a man who needs to look good cannot afford to admit he's done badly. He was done with the performance. He still thought about her every morning. Not strategically, not as a problem with a solution. He thought about her the way you think about something that has been part of the rhythm of your days, and has now stopped, with a particular awareness of absence that is different from loneliness, because it is too specific to be lonely. He knew exactly what was missing. He missed the sound of her in the kitchen before sunrise. He missed the particular quality of attention she brought to every task she touched, as though each thing, the cream, the accounts, the bread, the boys' school books, was worth doing with complete care because it was hers to do, and she did not do things carelessly. He missed Tobias, having someone to sit in the kitchen with in the mornings. He missed the butter. He missed in a way he had not been prepared for. The specific feeling of coming into a room and knowing that something had been made right in it by someone who understood how to make things right. He was 4 days into this particular form of missing when Tobias came to his desk on Friday evening and set a new entry on top of the ledger he was working on. I found this in her handwriting, Tobias said. It was tucked in the back of the dairy record. I think she forgot it when she packed, or I don't know. Maybe she left it on purpose. It was a single sheet of paper, folded once. On the outside, in Mabel's neat, precise, were the words "Dairy Improvement Notes for whoever manages this next." Gideon unfolded it. It was 4 pages of dense, careful handwriting, every improvement she had made to the dairy operation, every adjustment to the cooling process, every supplier she had renegotiated, every sanitation change she had implemented, every record she had reorganized, written out in such complete detail that a person with no prior knowledge of the Mercer dairy could read it and understand exactly how it worked and why it worked and what would go wrong if they stopped maintaining it. She had written it before she left. She had documented everything she had built in enough detail to protect it for the benefit of a ranch that had not paid her and a man who had not asked her what she wanted. And she had left it tucked in the back of a record where it would eventually be found. Gideon sat at his desk with the 4 pages in his hands for a long time. Tobias sat in the chair across from him and let him sit. She could have let it fall apart, Tobias said eventually. She knew she was leaving. She could have just gone. Nobody would have known what she'd changed or why it worked. I know, Gideon said. She wrote it up anyway, I know. Because she cared about the dairy, Tobias said. Because she cared about the work itself, not about whether anyone would thank her for it. Gideon set the pages down on his desk very carefully. The way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll feel if you're not careful. She told me, he said, that she wanted to matter to the people she gave her work to. Not as labor. Yes, Tobias said. And instead of asking her anything about herself, Gideon said, I watched her for 6 months and noticed everything she did and nothing about who she was. He paused. And I thought that was knowing her. Tobias was quiet. It isn't, Gideon said. No, Tobias agreed. It isn't. Gideon looked at the 4 pages of dairy notes in Mabel's handwriting. A woman who reorganized your dairy and documented her improvements for the next person. Who corrected your ledger without embarrassing you. Who covered a boy's school books in flour sack paper and sat up with your sick hands and turned your accounts from a mess into a system, and then, when she left, wrote you a 4-page guide to maintaining everything she had built. Not because you deserved it, because she cared about the work. Because she was that kind of person. Tobias, he said. Yes, I'm going to write her a letter. Tobias looked at him. Not to ask her to come back, Gideon said quickly. Not yet, maybe not for a long time. But I need to, I want to, he stopped. He tried again. I want her to know that her dairy notes were found. That they're being used. That what she built didn't fall apart the minute she walked away. He paused. I want her to know the ranch remembered her correctly, even if I didn't. Tobias considered this for a moment. That's a good reason to write a letter, he said. And I want to apologize, Gideon said, in writing. Where she can read it as many times as she needs to and I can't take it back. That, Tobias said, is an even better reason. Mabel received the letter on a Tuesday, 10 days after she had arrived in Wichita. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope before she turned it over. Gideon's hand was cramped and deliberate in the way of a man who had learned penmanship from a serious teacher and had never quite forgiven himself for not being better at it. Her name and the Whitmore address were written in the careful block letters of someone who was being very precise about something that mattered to him. She stood at the bottom of the Whitmore staircase with the letter in her hand for a full minute before she went upstairs. She sat on her bed, she looked at the envelope. She put it on the table beside the lamp and went downstairs and helped with supper preparation. And chopped the onions and seasoned the stew and managed the biscuits. And ate supper with 3 other boarders who were all perfectly pleasant. And came back upstairs. She looked at the envelope. She picked it up, she opened it, it was 2 pages. She did not know what she had been expecting, a plea, a renegotiation, a justification, and what she found was none of those things. It was an accounting. Dear Miss Pike, I am writing to inform you that the dairy improvement notes you left in the record book have been found and are being used. The cream separation is running correctly. The cooling channel improvement is holding. The supplier adjustment you made to the Dalton account has been maintained. What you built is still standing. She read that paragraph twice. I am also writing to apologize, not because I expected to change anything, and not because I hope it will bring you back, but because you were correct and I was wrong, and wrong things require acknowledgement in writing. I did not pay you what I owed you. I kept your wages as a reason for you to stay, because I was afraid of what it meant that I wanted you to stay, and did not know how to say so without something holding you there. That was wrong. The wages were yours. The decision to stay should have always been only yours. I turned your own earnings into a debt you didn't owe, and that is not something I can correct by paying the $30, though I should have paid them in April. I also want to say, though, I have no right to ask anything of you, that what the people in this town have said about you is wrong. You were not a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. You were a skilled, intelligent, capable professional who took an underpaid position out of necessity and did 3 times the work we agreed on with complete competence and more patience than any person in your situation was required to offer. If I hear it said otherwise again, I will correct it. The ranch is being restructured. Wages are paid on the 1st. Contracts are written. The household accounts are now recorded properly. Using your system, because your system is correct. I hope Wichita is treating you fairly. You deserve to be treated fairly. Gideon Mercer, beneath his name in writing slightly smaller than the rest. Almost as though he had nearly not included it, Tobias asks that I tell you he finished the poetry book you left on his chair. He says it was better than he expected. Mabel sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She read it 3 times. Not the way you read something for meaning she had understood every word on the first reading, but the way you read something when you need to be sure it is real. When you need to verify that a thing you were not expecting actually exists in the world. She put the letter on the table beside the lamp. She sat in the chair and looked out the window at the Wichita street in the October evening, the particular busy, comfortable street noise of a working city. So different from the enormous quiet of the Kansas prairie. Neither worse nor better, just different, in the way that different lives feel different without one of them being wrong. She pressed her hand flat against the letter. He had apologized in writing. He had said she was correct, not as a concession, not as a way to get something back. In writing, where it stayed, he had told her the dairy was still standing. He was going to correct the town. She sat with all of that for a long time. Then she got out her own paper and her pen, and she wrote a reply. It was not long. She was not ready for long. She was not ready to offer anything except acknowledgement. Because she had spent 6 months giving more than acknowledgement, and she had learned where that led. And she was not going to move faster than the truth of what she was feeling, simply because a man had written her a letter that was better than she had expected. Mr. Mercer, she wrote, thank you for the letter. I am glad the dairy notes were found. The cooling channel will need checking again in February. When the temperature drops, there is a note on the 2nd page about this. The Whitmore boarding house is a well-run establishment. I am paid on the 1st. Please tell Tobias that the 2nd book on my shelf at the ranch is better than the 1st. He may have it. She read it back. She added one more line. At the bottom, in smaller writing, the apology was noted. It was the right thing to do. She folded it, she sealed it. She set it beside her lamp to post in the morning. Then she sat back in her chair and she looked at the ceiling of her small clean room with its locked door and its east-facing window and the morning light she hadn't seen yet but already trusted was coming. And she thought about dairy channels and ledger columns and a boy who read poetry and a man who had finally put something true on paper and signed his name to it. She was not ready to go back. She might never be ready to go back. But something in her chest, some small, precise knot that had been pulling tight for 6 months, had loosened, just slightly, just enough. She turned down the lamp and the room went dark, and outside the window Wichita went on with its evening. alive and indifferent, and full of people who did not know her name. And Mabel Pike lay on her back in a bed that was hers in a room she had paid for, and closed her eyes and slept. For the first time in 6 months, without counting anything. The letters started coming every 2 weeks. Not every week, that would have been too much. And Gideon Mercer was learning, slowly and with the particular difficulty of a man who had spent 36 years communicating primarily through action and silence, that too much was exactly the wrong thing to offer a woman who had left, because she had already been given too much of the wrong kind of attention and not enough of the right kind. 2 weeks. Enough time for a letter to travel and a reply to come back. Enough space for neither of them to feel crowded by what was growing in the space between Wichita and Briar Hollow. His second letter told her the February check on the cooling channel had been completed, per her notes, and that Hank Reardon had found a hairline crack in the secondary joint that would have caused significant damage by spring. He told her the dairy production had dropped 14% in her absence. He told her Mrs. Garfield, the new cook, was competent and reliable, and had reorganized the pantry in a way that was different from Mabel's system but functional. And he said this without any implication that different was worse, which cost him something but felt important to get right. At the bottom he wrote, "Tobias has read the second book. He says it is indeed better than the first and wants to know if there is a third." Mabel's reply told him the February check was good practice and that the cooling should be checked again in April, regardless of whether it appeared to need it. Because the kind of damage that built slowly was always worse than the kind that announced itself. She told him she was glad the production drop was only 14% and not more. She did not comment on Mrs. Garfield. At the bottom, she wrote, "There is a third book. It is on the shelf above the second. Tell him the last chapter is the most important one." The third letter was different. Gideon sat at his desk for 2 hours before writing it, which was not his habit. His habit was to write the thing he meant and then write it again more carefully, and then thence before he talked himself out of it. 2 hours meant something had changed in what he was trying to say. "Miss Pike," he wrote, "I want to tell you something that is not about the dairy and not about the ranch. I went to the dry goods store on Wednesday, and I heard Mrs. Albright speaking about you to 2 women I did not recognize. She was saying that your departure from the ranch had been, she used the word inevitable, that a woman in your position had always been, in her word, unsuitable for a respectable household. She implied other things I will not repeat because they do not deserve to be written down. I turned around and I walked back to where she was standing, and I said the following. Mrs. Albright, Miss Pike, was employed by Mercer Ranch as a skilled household and dairy manager. In 6 months, she increased dairy revenue by 32%, corrected accounting errors that would have cost this ranch over $200, and managed every aspect of a working household with more professional competence than I had any right to expect. She left for a better-paying position in Wichita because I failed to pay her the wages she was owed on time. That failure was mine. Miss Pike's reputation in this town should reflect her work, which was excellent, and not the circumstances I put her in, which were not." Mrs. Albright did not respond. "I thought you should know." Mabel read that letter, sitting at the kitchen table of the Whitmore boarding house on a Thursday morning, with a cup of coffee going cold beside her elbow. And she read it 3 times, and then she set it face down on the table, and pressed both palms flat against the back of it, and sat very still for a moment, breathing. Mrs. Whitmore came through from the front of the house, looked at Mabel, looked at the face-down letter, and said nothing. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the other end of the table and drank it in companionable silence. After a moment, Mabel said, "Someone said something. On my behalf, in public. Did they say the right thing, Mrs.?" Mabel thought about it. "Yes," she said. "Exactly the right thing, said Mrs. Whitmore, in the tone of a woman who had lived long enough to know that exactly the right thing was rarer than people admitted, and should be acknowledged accordingly. That's not nothing. No, Mabel said, it isn't. She turned the letter back over and read it a fourth time. Then she wrote her reply. It was longer than usual. She told him he had said the right thing. She told him the 32% figure was accurate, but that he should also account for the reduction in supply costs from the renegotiated Dalton contract, which brought the real improvement closer to 40%. She told him that Mrs. Albright was a woman who had never been in a position of economic vulnerability and therefore had no framework for understanding one, which made her cruel in the way that ignorance made people cruel, not from malice, but from the failure of imagination that came with never having needed anyone else. Then she wrote, I want to ask you something. You are not required to answer. In August, when Tobias told you about the Wichita offer, what did you think? She sealed the letter. She posted it. She went back to work. She thought about the question she had asked for 3 days before his answer arrived. His answer was one paragraph. I thought she has somewhere better to go. And then I thought, of course she does. And then I thought about what it meant, that my first instinct was not to pay her what she was owed so that she could make that choice freely, but to keep the information to myself and hope she didn't act on it. And I understood what kind of man I was being. I kept understanding it, and I kept not changing it for 2 more months. And that is what I am most ashamed of, not that I failed, but that I knew I was failing and continued anyway. Mabel read that paragraph and set the letter on her bedside table and looked at the ceiling. He had known. He had known from August and continued for 2 more months, and he had admitted it in writing without making it smaller than it was or giving it a softer name than it deserved. She did not know what to do with a man who told the truth about himself that clearly. She had not encountered that before. She wrote back, Thank you for answering honestly. That is harder than most people make it look. She did not say anything else that day, but she sat with it. The way you sit with something that has changed the shape of a question you have been asking yourself for a long time. November came in cold and fast over the Kansas prairie. The way it always did, not gradually, not with warning, but with the flat-footed certainty of a season that had somewhere to be. In Briar Hollow, the town was adjusting to the new version of Gideon Mercer, in the way small towns adjusted to changes in their most prominent citizens slowly, watchfully, and with the particular mixture of respect and resentment that attaches to a fan who appears to be improving himself without asking anyone's permission. He paid his hands on the 1st of November in full, in public, at the main table of the ranch house, with the ledger open and every man signing his name to the receipt. Hank Reardon told Pete Alderman that evening, in the bunkhouse, that he had worked for 6 employers in 30 years, and only 2 of them had ever done that. And Gideon Mercer was now one of them. He settled his account at the dry goods store, including a $3 overcharge from 18 months prior that he had discovered in Mabel's reorganized records, and that the Delaney's had completely forgotten. He did not make a production of it. He simply paid it. He attended the November town meeting, which he had skipped for the previous 2 years on the grounds that he found it great unproductive, and he sat in the back row and listened to a discussion about the road between Briar Hollow and the Henderson property that had been a problem since spring. And at the end he stood up and offered to contribute materials and 2 of his hands for a repair weekend in December. And then he sat back down. The room was quiet for a moment, with the particular quality of quiet that meant people were recalibrating something. Ruth Hadley, the schoolteacher's wife, was sitting 3 rows ahead of him. She turned around and looked at him with an expression that was direct and assessing, and not unfriendly. Mr. Mercer, she said, is this a permanent change or a temporary one? A few people shifted in their seats. Because Ruth Hadley had the habit of asking the question, everyone else was thinking and calling it the question it was. I expect that depends on whether I keep doing it, Gideon said. Ruth studied him for another moment. Fair enough, she said, and turned back around. Afterward, outside the meeting hall, she fell into step beside him on the way to the street. I spoke to Miss Pike, she said, before she left. Twice at the Delaney store. Gideon looked at her. She was extraordinary, Ruth said simply. Not in the way people say women are extraordinary when they mean patient and uncomplaining. I mean actually extraordinary, intelligent, perceptive. Completely clear-eyed about her situation, without being bitter about it. She paused. She deserved to be treated better than she was treated in this town. Yes, Gideon said. She did. She deserved to be treated better by you, Ruth said. Yes, he said, she did. Ruth nodded. She seemed to be deciding something. I'm going to write to her, she said, if you have no objection. She should know there are people here who remember her correctly. I have no objection, Gideon said. She'd be glad to hear from you. He did not say how he knew that. But he knew it. The letter from Ruth Hadley arrived at the Whitmore the same week as Gideon's fourth letter. And Mabel read them in the wrong order, Ruth's first, which told her that Briar Hollow was changing in small specific ways that Ruth described with the wry precision of a woman who observed her community without illusions, and that Gideon Mercer had stood up at the town meeting and offered road materials and labor, and that Mrs. Albright had been conspicuously quiet since Wednesday of the previous week, and that several people who had said nothing in Mabel's defense while she was there were finding ways to speak more carefully now. I want to say, Ruth wrote, that I am sorry I did not speak louder when you were here. I said one thing to Mrs. Albright in the dry goods store, and then I let it drop. And I should not have let it drop, and I know that does not help you now, but I want you to know I know it. Mabel sat with that letter for a long time. Then she read Gideon's. The dairy produced the best November numbers in 3 years. He wrote, I am attributing this to your February channel notes, which Hank followed precisely. I want you to know that your work is still working. Even when you are not here to maintain it, you built something that runs on its own now. That is a different thing from labor that stops when the person stops. That is craft. And then, I have been thinking about what you said on the stage road. That you wanted to matter to the people you gave your work to, not as labor, but as a person. I want to tell you that I understand the difference now, and I want to tell you that I am ashamed it took me this long to understand it. And I want to tell you something I should have said on the 1st of April. Your name is Mabel Rowena Pike. You grew up I don't know where. That is still one of the things I don't know. You are, I believe, 28 years old, which I calculated from something Tobias mentioned, and which I may have wrong. You read poetry until the lamp oil runs low, and then you sit in the dark because you don't waste things. You correct people's mistakes in a way that protects their dignity. You give better than you receive, and you have been doing it your whole life, and you are tired of it. Which is the correct response to it. I don't know most of what I should know about you. But I know that, and I am asking, not requesting your return. Not negotiating, just asking if you would be willing to let me learn the rest. Mabel set the letter down. She stood up from the table and walked to the window and looked at the Wichita Street in the November gray and breathed slowly. In and out, the way she breathed when something had hit her in the chest and she was deciding how to be with it. He had guessed her age. He had gotten it wrong. She was 28. He was right about that, but that wasn't the thing. The thing was that he had noticed enough details over 6 months of watching her. The details Tobias had recorded and the ones Tobias hadn't. To piece together a guess, the thing was that he was asking. Not offering, not trading. She went back to the table. She picked up her pen. She wrote, "You have her age right." She grew up in Salina, the second of 4 children. Father a grain merchant, mother a seamstress. I taught her that precise work done slowly was worth more than quick work done carelessly. She left Salina at 22 when her father's business failed and her opportunities there failed with it. She has been in domestic employment since then, in 4 different households. And Mercer Ranch was the 4th. I have never had a position last longer than 8 months. Usually something ends them. An employer who changes circumstances. A household that moves. She paused. She wrote, "The difference at Mercer Ranch was that I stayed for 6 months, knowing the wages had stopped. Because I kept deciding that the work was worth doing regardless. I have been thinking about what that means. I have decided it means I cared about what I was building. Not just what I was being paid to maintain. That is a different thing. As you said, it is harder to walk away from. I am not saying I am coming back. I am saying I understand now why it was harder to leave than it should have been." And it was not only about the debt. She sealed the letter. Her hand was not entirely steady. She posted it anyway. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon in late November, Mabel was reorganizing the Whitmore's supply records. She had asked permission. Mrs. Whitmore had said yes before Mabel finished the sentence when Mrs. Whitmore came in from the front of the house with a look on her face that Mabel had not seen before. "There is a man at the front desk," Mrs. Whitmore said. He arrived on the afternoon stage from Briar Hollow. Mabel's hands went still on the supply ledger. "He is tall," Mrs. Whitmore said, "dark-haired. He has a hat and he is holding it. Not wearing it, which suggests he was raised with manners, though he appears to have forgotten some of them along the way. He asked for you by name. 'Miss Mabel Pike,' he said. 'Is she resident here?' And I told him that was not information I gave to strangers. And he said his name was Gideon Mercer and that you would know who he was." Mabel set down her pen. "He said," Mrs. Whitmore continued, and I am quoting him exactly because I found it unusual enough to remember. He said, "I am not here to ask her to come back. I am here because I wrote her a letter last week, and I said things in it that a person should not have to read for the first time alone." The supply room was very quiet. "He came on the stage," Mabel said. "He did. From Briar Hollow, Mrs. Whitmore confirmed. "Which I understand is a 4-hour ride." Mabel looked at her hands. She had not expected this. She had expected another letter. Maybe 2. Maybe a gradual correspondence that built slowly toward something she hadn't named yet. She had not expected him to get on a stage. She had not expected. "I said things a person should not have to read for the first time alone. Tell him I'll be out in a moment," she said. She sat at the supply table for that moment and breathed and told herself what she knew. She knew she was not going back to Mercer Ranch today. She knew she was not making any decision today that she had not already been making carefully for 6 weeks. She knew that a man getting on a stage was not the same as a man changing, and that the letters were not proof of anything except that he could write well when he was trying. She knew all of that. She also knew that he had said she should not have to read certain things for the first time alone. And that was true. It had been true. She stood up. She straightened her work dress. She walked through the door into the front room of the Whitmore boarding house. Gideon Mercer was standing at the far end of the front room, with his hat in both hands, which was exactly as Mrs. Whitmore had described him. And he looked like a man who had been on a 4-hour stage and had not slept especially well the night before and had come anyway. He looked like a man who had made a decision in the particular way that certain men made decisions, not by reasoning through all the options, but by recognizing the thing that was true and moving toward it before he could argue himself out of it. He saw her. He did not move, he waited. Mabel crossed the room and stopped 6 feet from him and looked at him directly. "You didn't write ahead," she said. "No," he said. "I was afraid you'd tell me not to come." "I might have," she said. "I know. That was a risk you had no right to make on my behalf," she said. "Yes." He held her gaze. "I know that too. I came anyway because there are things in that letter that—" He stopped. He tried again. "I told you I wanted to learn the rest of who you are. I wanted to say that out loud, not on paper. I wanted you to hear it in my actual voice so there was no question of what I meant." Mabel looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get coffee." Something in his face shifted, not relief exactly, but the specific loosening of a man who had braced for a wall and found a door instead. He sat. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups and set one in front of him and sat down across the table. Mrs. Whitmore was conspicuously absent from the front room. which Mabel noted and appreciated. You wrote 4 hours, she said. Yes. Because of one letter, because of 6 weeks of letters, he said. And one that said something I needed to say in person. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. You told me you grew up in Salina, second of 4 children. Father in grain, mother a seamstress who taught you that precise work done slowly was worth more than quick work done carelessly. He looked at her. I want to know the rest. The rest is a great deal more than a stage ride's worth, she said. I have time, he said. She looked at him across the table. She looked at the hat he had set on the chair beside him and the coffee cup he was holding with both hands and the way he was looking at her, not the way an employer looks at an employee. Not even quite the way a man looks at a woman he finds attractive. But the way a person looks at another person they are genuinely trying to see for the first time and are aware they had years of chances to see before. It was, she decided, the right way to look. She was not going to rush it. But she was not going to send him away either. My mother's name was Clara, she said. She died when I was 19, influenza. She was 41 years old, and she had never once in her life asked anyone to do for her what she could do for herself. She paused. I used to think that was strength. I understand now that it was also loneliness. There is a difference between not needing anyone and not allowing yourself to need anyone. And my mother never found that difference, and I was 26 years old before I understood she had missed it. Gideon listened. He did not speak. He did not fill the silence with anything. She noticed that. When my father's business failed, she said, I went to work. I was good at it. I am good at it. And I have spent 6 years being good at it in households where being good at your work was sufficient reason to keep taking your wages and insufficient reason to consider you a person. She looked at him steadily. I should have left Mercer Ranch in July, maybe June. I stayed until October, because she paused. Choosing the word precisely. Because I had become invested. In the dairy. In the accounts. In the way the household was running. In Tobias, a pause, and in the possibility that you would eventually see what was in front of you. I did see it, he said. I saw it badly and too late. Yes, she said. You did. I am trying to see it correctly now, he said. I don't know if I'm succeeding. I know I don't have the right to ask you to evaluate that for me. But I want you to know that the trying is real, and it isn't stopped. It isn't performance. I am not fixing the ranch to win something back. I am fixing the ranch because it was wrong, and I am fixing myself for the same reason. You leaving was not what taught me I was wrong. I knew I was wrong in August. You leaving was what made it impossible to keep pretending I didn't. Mabel looked at him. Outside, the November wind was moving through the Wichita street. Cold and purposeful. Inside the Whitmore's front room it was warm. And the coffee was good. And across the table from her a man who had kept her wages for 6 months was telling her, in his actual voice, that he was ashamed of exactly the right things. I am not coming back to the ranch, she said. I know, he said. Not to work for you, she said. Not on any arrangement that puts you above me in anything except the arrangement itself. If I ever return to Briar Hollow, it will be as something other than your housekeeper. Yes, he said. I need you to hear that clearly, she said, not as a negotiating position. As a fact. I hear it, he fact. I accept it as a fact. She looked at him. He looked back. What are you proposing then, she said. You came 4 hours on a stage to tell me things your letters had already said. What is it you actually want? He was quiet for a moment. Then I want to keep writing to you. I want to come to Wichita again. If you'll permit it, and have coffee and conversation, and find out what I should have been finding out for 6 months. He paused. He said it plainly. I want to know you. Not what you do, who you are. And I want to do that slowly and correctly. Without debt between us, and without anything hanging over your choices. And I am not asking for anything at the end of it, because I don't have the right to ask for anything at the end of it. I am asking only if the thing itself, the knowing, if that is something you are willing to give me a chance at. The front room was quiet. Mabel thought about 6 months. She thought about flour sacks and dairy notes, and a boy's careful handwriting, and a letter that had arrived on a Tuesday and changed the shape of a question she had been carrying. She thought about her mother, who had never allowed herself to need anyone, and the loneliness that had lived inside that strength. She thought about precise work done slowly. "You may write," she said. "And you may come to Wichita with notice once a month. You will not pressure me. You will not negotiate. You will not make this into a transaction." "No," he said. "If at any point I decide this is not something I want to continue, I will tell you, and that will be final." "Yes," he said. "And you will tell no one in Briar Hollow what we are doing," she said. "Because I will not be anyone's speculation again." He looked at her. "I will tell Tobias," he said. "He already knows, and he cannot unknow it." "But no one else." Tobias, she conceded. "No one else." He nodded. They sat with their coffee in the warm front room of the Whitmore boarding house, 50 miles from a cold stove and 6 empty flour sacks. And they talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with the ranch or the dairy or wages or what anyone in Briar Hollow was saying. She told him about Selena. He told her about the first cattle drive he had ridden at 17 and how he had cried from exhaustion on the third day and decided the only way to survive it was to decide he was the kind of man who finished things. She told him her mother's name was Clara and that she missed her most in October, when the preserving was done and the winter was starting. He told her his wife's name had been Eleanor and that he had been 29 when she died and that he had not spoken her name out loud to anyone in 2 years. They talked until the light changed and Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the doorway to announce that supper was in 30 minutes and that the gentleman was welcome to stay if he wished, in the tone of a woman who had already decided the gentleman was staying. He stayed for supper. He took the evening stage back to Briar Hollow at 8 o'clock. At the door of the Whitmore, he put his hat on and turned to her and said, "I'll write on Monday. I'll read it on Thursday," she said. Something in his face, that particular complicated expression she had seen once on the stage road and once again across the supply room door, and now here in the lamplight of the Whitmore porch, shifted into something quieter. Something that was not quite a smile, but was in the vicinity of one. "Thursday," he said. "All right." He walked toward the stage. She watched him go. She stood on the Whitmore porch in the November cold and watched the stage pull away from the street and disappear around the bend. And she stood there after it was gone for a moment longer, with the cold wind and the Wichita evening sounds and the lamp behind her through the front window casting a warm square of light onto the porch boards. Inside her chest, that small precise knot had loosened a little further. She did not rush it. She went inside and she locked her door. And she sat at her table and she opened her notebook, not an accounting ledger, not a household record, personal notebook that she had bought for 75 cents at the Wichita dry goods store and had been filling for 6 weeks with the particular thoughts of a woman who was, for the first time in a long time, living a life that was entirely hers to document. She wrote the date at the top of a new page. She wrote, "He came on the stage. He said what the letter said, but in his voice. That is a different thing. I am beginning to understand that he is a different man than the one I left. I do not know yet if he is different enough. I am going to find out slowly and correctly and on my own terms." She paused. She wrote one more line. "My mother would have sent him away. I am not sure my mother was always right." She closed the notebook. She turned down the lamp. She did not count anything before she slept. He wrote on Monday. As promised, the letter arrived at the Whitmore on Thursday, as expected, and Mabel read it at the kitchen table before the breakfast boarders came down. With her coffee and the particular Thursday morning quiet that she had come to think of as hers. She had arranged her week around it, without quite deciding to the way certain things settle into a life, not because you planned them, but because they fit the shape of what you actually are. His Monday letters were different from the earlier ones. The earlier letters had been careful, accountable. The letters of a man making a case. These new ones were something else, less structured. More searching. The letters of a man who had stopped trying to say the right thing and started trying to say the true thing, which was harder and less polished and considerably more interesting. He wrote about the ranch in winter, not the operations, but the quality of it. The particular silence of a cattle ranch when the ground was frozen and the work slowed and the days shortened until there were only a few hours of usable light and a man had more time than he knew what to do with to sit with his own thoughts. He wrote that he had not been good at sitting with his own thoughts before, that he had always solved the problem of too much time by making more work, and that he was learning, slowly, that a man who never sat still was often a man who was afraid of what sitting still would show him. He wrote, "I am afraid of quite a lot, it turns out. I am finding this is not the weakness I always assumed it was." Mabel read that sentence twice and wrote in the margin of the letter, lightly in pencil so she could erase it, "No, it is not." She did not write that in her reply, but she kept thinking about it. December came. He wrote every Monday, she wrote every Thursday. The letters grew longer on both sides, not because they were running out of things to say, but because they were discovering that things said carefully opened onto other things that also needed saying. The way a well-made door, once opened, reveals a room you didn't know was there. She told him about the 4 households she had worked in before Mercer Ranch, the Hendersons in Salina, who had been kind enough but had moved to Denver without a week's notice and left her with 3 days' wages, and a reference letter that was accurate but cold. The Marshalls in Abilene, who had been comfortable and unobservant in the way that comfortable people sometimes were. Not cruel but absent, present in the house without seeing what the house contained. The Donahues, which she did not describe in detail except to say that she had left after 6 weeks and had not regretted it. He wrote back, "I am not going to ask you about the Donahues unless you want to tell me. But I want you to know that whatever it was, the fact that you left is the correct fact. Leaving something that is wrong is not failure. I understand that better now than I did 6 months ago." She read that letter on a Thursday morning in December and sat with it for a while and thought about what it meant that a man who had once used her inability to leave against her was now, unprompted, telling her that leaving wrong things was the correct response. She wrote, "The Donahues were not violent. They were simply the kind of household where a woman's refusal to accept certain things was treated as the problem rather than the things themselves. I was there 6 weeks. I have not spoken of it to anyone in 4 years. I am telling you now because you said the right thing about it before I told you. Which means I trust your instinct on it." She paused over that last sentence for a long time. She sent it anyway. His reply arrived the following Thursday, and it was 2 lines. "Thank you for telling me. I am glad you left after 6 weeks. I am sorry it was something you had to leave from. I mean to be someone you do not have to leave from. I am aware I do not yet have the standing to promise that. I am telling you anyway." Mabel read those 2 lines and put the letter in the box she had begun keeping under her bed, not a formal keepsake box. Just a hat box she had repurposed, its lid set loosely so she could open it without ceremony. The letters were in there in order, all of them. She was not sure what she was keeping them for. She told herself she wasn't sure. She was sure. He came to Wichita the 2nd Friday of December. With notice, as agreed. He brought Tobias. This was not what she had expected. And when she saw the boy come through the Whitmore's front door, a half step behind his brother, her chest did something complicated that she was not going to examine in a front hallway. Tobias saw her and stopped walking. He was taller than she remembered. 6 weeks had done something to the proportions of him, not dramatically, but perceptibly, the way 11-year-olds sometimes shifted between seasons as though practicing for the person they were going to become. He was looking at her with the careful, serious expression that had always been particular to him. The expression that meant he was deciding something. Then he crossed the hallway in 6 quick steps and put his arms around her with the straightforward physical certainty of a child. who had decided that whatever the adults were being careful about, he was not going to be careful about this. Mabel held on. She did not say anything. Neither did he. Gideon stood 3 feet behind them and looked at the wall and gave them the moment without making it into anything. When Tobias stepped back, his expression was a shade less careful. "I read the 3rd book," he said. "What did you think of the last chapter?" she asked. "I think the author was braver on the last page than anywhere else in it," he said. "I think he'd been working up to that last page the whole book, and he finally just said it." Mabel looked at him. "That's exactly right," she said. "That's exactly what he did." Tobias nodded. Satisfied, he looked at his brother. "I told you she'd know." "You told me nothing of the kind," Gideon said. "I thought it very loudly," Tobias said. They had supper at the Whitmore. All 3 of them, and Mrs. Whitmore set the good end of the table, without being asked, and produced a roast that was better than her usual Friday effort, which Mabel suspected was intentional, and which she appreciated without mentioning. Tobias talked about school. He had a teacher now. A young man from Ohio named Mr. Garrett, who had the useful quality of not explaining things Tobias already understood, which Tobias rated more highly than enthusiasm. He talked about the ranch, about Hank Reardon teaching him to read cattle weight by eye, about Mrs. Garfield's opinion of the Mercer kitchen pantry, which was apparently extensive and delivered without reservation. "She says the preserving shelf is organized wrong," Tobias reported. "She rearranged it." "She's right," Mabel said. "I organized it for someone who knew where everything was, which was only me. A shared kitchen needs a different logic." Tobias looked at her. "You're not upset about it?" "Why would I be upset because you organized it?" "I organized it to work," Mabel said. "If a better organization works better, that's the point of the thing." She looked at him steadily. "Work is not about ownership, Tobias. It's about what the work does." Tobias absorbed this in the particular way he absorbed things completely. Without performance, filing it somewhere, she suspected he would retrieve accurately for the rest of his life. Gideon had been watching her while she said it. She noticed, and did not acknowledge noticing. After supper, Tobias fell asleep in the sitting room armchair, the particular abrupt sleep of a child who has been running on interest and good behavior for several hours and then simply stops, and Gideon and Mabel sat at the cleared supper table, with coffee and the quiet of a house where one person was sleeping and the others were choosing their words. "He wanted to come," Gideon said. "I didn't bring him to." "I know," she said. "It's all right. I'm glad he came. He missed you," Gideon said. More than he said, and he said quite a lot. She looked at her coffee cup. "I missed him," she said. He stopped. He started again. "I'm not asking you to answer that the way I want you to answer it. I am asking honestly, because I want to understand what this is. What it is to you." She looked at him across the table. "Yes," she said. "I miss the ranch. I miss the prairie. I miss the particular quality of work that is building something rather than maintaining something, which is what I have here and which is good work but different." She paused. "And I missed," she was careful, "I missed the person I thought you might be. The one I could see evidence of, sometimes. When you were not performing being a rancher." Something in his face shifted. "The one in the letters," he said. "The one in the letters," she said. "Yes, that is the actual one," he said. "I did not know how to make that one visible before. I am not certain I know how now. But I know you are," she said. "Is it?" He stopped. He looked at her directly. "Is it enough?" "The trying?" She did not answer immediately. She gave the question the weight it deserved, which he noticed and waited for. "It's the right question," she said finally. "That's not a small thing. You're asking whether your effort is sufficient rather than assuming it is." "That's yes. That matters. But I don't know yet," she said. "I am not saying that to be unkind. I am saying it because it's true, and because you have told me you want the true thing rather than the manageable thing." "I do want that," he said. "Then the answer is I don't know yet," she said, "and the not knowing is mine to sit with at my own pace." And what I need from you is to let me sit with it without making it into something that requires a resolution on your timeline." He was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "I know it is," she said without sharpness. "Just plainly." He almost smiled. January arrived with a hard freeze that locked the Whitmore's pipes on the 3rd and kept Mabel busy for 2 days managing the household through the particular crisis of a large building without reliable water, which she handled with the systematic calm of a woman who had managed larger crises with fewer resources and was quietly grateful that this one at least came with Mrs. Whitmore's full confidence and the authority to make decisions. When the pipes were restored and the Whitmore was running properly again, Mrs. Whitmore called her into the office and sat her down across the desk and looked at her with the direct assessing gaze that Mabel had come to understand meant something consequential was coming. "I want to discuss your position here," Mrs. Whitmore said. Mabel sat still and kept her expression even and thought, with the specific alertness of a woman who had been through this conversation 4 times before, that she had been here $9 a month and a pipe crisis long enough to feel the particular shape of what came next. "I am not ending your employment," Mrs. Whitmore said immediately, which told Mabel she had read the stillness correctly. "I am offering you something different. I want you to take over the household management here. Formally, with a contract and a title and a way that reflects the actual responsibility." She paused. $12 a month. Your name on the management ledger. Full authority over supplies, staffing, kitchen, and maintenance. I will handle the business accounts and the front of house. Everything behind the front door is yours." Mabel looked at her. $12, she said. $12, Mrs. Whitmore said. "Signed for, as always." Mabel was quiet for a moment. It was a good offer. It was an excellent offer. It was the kind of offer that a woman in domestic employment in 1884 encountered perhaps once in a working life if she was skilled and fortunate, and had found the right employer. And Mabel was skilled, and she had found Mrs. Whitmore, and she understood exactly what was being placed in front of her. She also understood that accepting it would mean Wichita. Permanently, or as permanently as anything was permanent. It would mean the Whitmore was her place, her work. Her name on a ledger in a city 50 miles from a cattle ranch on the Kansas prairie. "Can I have until Monday?" she said. "You may have until Monday, Mrs. Whitmore said, without surprise, in the tone of a woman who had already factored in that this particular employee would need to think about it. Mabel wrote to Gideon that evening, not on Thursday. On a Saturday, which she had never done before, which meant something, and she knew he would know it meant something. She did not tell him about the offer. She wrote something else. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me, without thinking about what you want the answer to mean. I need you to answer as if the answer has no consequences. Because I need the truth of it, not the strategic version. If I never came back to Briar Hollow, if I stayed in Wichita and built my life here, and our letters continued as they are, and your visits continued as they are, but nothing changed. Nothing resolved, nothing concluded, would you continue? Not as a way to keep me available. Would you continue because the thing itself, the knowing? The letters, this is worth having on its own terms. Regardless of what it becomes." She posted it Saturday evening. His reply came Wednesday. He had written it Monday and sent it express, which cost him extra and which she noted. "Yes," he wrote. "Not because I don't want it to become something. I do. I will not pretend otherwise. But yes, what we are doing now is worth doing for what it is. You have been worth knowing since the first week you were at the ranch, and I wasted 6 months of the opportunity. I will not waste what I have now by making it conditional on what it might become. Whatever you decide about your life and your work, I want to know you. That is not a negotiating position. It is the actual thing." Mabel sat with that letter for a long time. Then she went to Mrs. Whitmore's office and accepted the position at $12 a month and signed the contract and shook the woman's hand. She was not going to Briar Hollow, but she was not closing the door. She was, for the first time in her adult life, holding two things at once, without needing to resolve them into one. February brought the letter she had not expected. It did not come from Gideon. It came from a name she did not recognize, a lawyer's office in Briar Hollow. The stationery formal, and the handwriting, the deliberate, impersonal script of professional correspondence. She opened it carefully. It was 2 pages. The first page was a formal letter from one Gerald Marsh, attorney at law, stating that he had been retained by Mr. Gideon Mercer of Mercer Ranch, Briar Hollow, Kansas, to draft a business proposal for Miss Mabel Rowena Pike's consideration. The second page was the proposal itself. She read it slowly. Then she read it again. Gideon was proposing a formal business partnership in the Mercer dairy operation. Not employment, partnership. Her name on the company records as co-principal. Operational authority over production, quality, and supplier relations. A 30% share of net dairy profits, paid quarterly and guaranteed in the Articles of Agreement. The right to conduct business independently, to make production decisions without requiring his approval. To maintain her own accounts, separate from the ranch's general ledger. At the bottom of the legal document, beneath the attorney's formal language, in handwriting she recognized, "This offer requires nothing from you except your consideration. It does not require you to return to Briar Hollow. It does not require you to change your current employment. It does not require you to feel anything about it except what you actually feel. Your name would be on the records. Your work would be yours. Legally, with documentation. Nobody would be able to say you were there on charity or desperation or anything except professional partnership. You built the dairy. I am asking if you would like to own part of what you built. You owe me nothing. There is no debt in this offer and no obligation behind it." Gideon, Mabel set the papers on her table. She pressed both hands flat on them. She looked at the wall. She had genuinely not seen this coming. She had expected letters. She had expected monthly visits. She had expected the slow, patient work of two people building trust in the particular way that trust was built after it had been broken carefully. Without shortcuts, without demanding that the other person move faster than they were ready to. She had not expected a legal document with her name on it. She had not expected 30%. She had not expected. Your work would be yours legally with documentation. She got up from the table. She walked to the window. She walked back. She sat down. She picked up the papers and read the partnership articles again. This time with the methodical attention she gave to every contract she had ever been offered. Looking for the language that gave someone else control. The clause that looked like fairness and operated as a trap. The paragraph that said one thing and meant another. She could not find it. The articles were clean, straightforward. Her rights were enumerated and protected. His rights were enumerated separately. Neither party's rights depended on the other's approval. It was, she recognized, the work of a good attorney who had been given honest instructions. She put the papers down. She thought about Gideon sitting across from Gerald Marsh in a Briar Hollow attorney's office, telling a lawyer what he wanted the document to protect, which was not his interests but hers. She thought about him paying legal fees to write her a contract that gave her authority and income and legal standing and asked nothing in return except her consideration. She thought about her name on company records, Mabel Rowena Pike, co-principal. She pressed her fingers against her closed eyes and breathed slowly and thought about her mother, who had never owned anything she couldn't carry, who had worked all her life with her hands and her precision, and her absolute refusal to ask for help, and had died at 41 with nothing in her own name. She thought about what her mother would have done with a legal document offering her 30% of something she had built. She thought her mother would have put it back in the envelope and sent it back unread. out of a pride that looked like dignity, but was actually a different kind of trap, the trap of needing no one so completely that you ended up with nothing. Mabel was not her mother. She picked up her pen. She did not write to Gideon. Not yet. She wrote to Gerald Marsh, attorney at law. And she asked 4 specific questions about the partnership articles, the dispute resolution clause, the buyout provision, the definition of net profit in Article 3, and the termination conditions in the event of dissolution. She asked them in the precise, clear language of someone who had read enough contracts to know which questions mattered and was not going to pretend otherwise. She posted the letter. She went to find Mrs. Whitmore. She found her at the front desk and said, "I need to tell you something, Mrs." Whitmore looked up. "I have been offered a business partnership in Briar Hollow," Mabel said. "I am not accepting it immediately. I have questions about the legal terms, and I am waiting for answers. But I want you to know about it, because you have been honest with me, and I intend to be honest with you, Mrs." Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. "Is it a good offer?" she asked. "I believe so," Mabel said, "if the answers to my questions are satisfactory." "Is it from Mercer?" "Yes, Mrs." Whitmore was quiet. Then, "Is it a partnership or is it a way of getting you back?" "He says it is a partnership," Mabel said. "He says it requires nothing except my consideration. He says there is no debt and no obligation." Mabel looked at her. "I think," she said carefully, "that it is the first time anyone has offered me legal ownership of something I built. And I think the offer is structured in a way that protects my interests rather than his. And I think he paid a lawyer to write it that way deliberately." She paused. "I also think that whether or not it is a way of getting me back, it is a good offer on its own terms, and I have learned that a good offer is a good offer regardless of the feelings behind it, Mrs." Whitmore nodded. "And the feelings behind it," she said, "are a separate question," Mabel said, "which I am considering separately." "Good," said Mrs. Whitmore. "That is the sensible approach." She looked back at her ledger. "Keep me informed," Mabel said. Gerald Marsh's reply arrived 10 days later. He answered all 4 questions. The dispute resolution clause specified a third-party arbitrator, not Mercer's choice alone. The buyout provision gave her right of first refusal at fair market value assessed by an independent party. Net profit was defined to exclude capital improvements, which was the correct definition, and prevented creative accounting from reducing her share. The termination conditions were mutual. Either party could dissolve the partnership with 90 days' notice, and dissolution required a full accounting before settlement. He had written a good contract. She wrote to Gideon that Thursday. Not about the contract. She had questions about the contract that she would address to him directly. But that was not the first thing. The first thing was this: "I want to tell you something I have not told you in any of the letters. I want to tell you now because the offer you have made requires me to be honest about things I have been holding carefully. I did not want to leave the ranch. I want you to know that. Not leave it in the sense of the work, though the work was part of it, but leave it in the way of the life. The dairy and the accounts and Tobias, and the particular quality of being somewhere that was becoming something because I was in it. I left because staying without dignity was not actually staying. But I want you to know that the leaving cost me something real, and I did not walk away easily. I am telling you this not because it changes anything about the terms of the partnership or the pace of what we are doing. I am telling you because you have been honest with me in writing for 3 months, and I owe you the same. I have 4 questions about the articles of agreement." She wrote the 4 questions. She sealed the letter. She held it for a moment before she let it go. Then she posted it and went back upstairs to the room with the east-facing window, and put her hands in her lap and sat still in the particular way she sat when she was letting herself feel something without managing it into something smaller. She had told him the leaving had cost her something. She had told him she had not walked away easily. She had told the truth. The room was quiet. The Wichita afternoon moved around outside the window, busy and indifferent and alive, and inside the room Mabel Pike sat with what she had just done and understood that something had shifted, not dramatically, not irrevocably, but the way the ground shifts in early spring when the freeze begins to give. Slow and underneath and undeniable. She was still not ready. But the distance between where she was and where she might be willing to go had shortened. And she knew it, and she did not run from the knowing. She sat with it. She let it be real. Gideon's reply to her letter arrived on a Tuesday. He had not waited for Thursday. He had not waited for Monday. The letter had been posted Saturday morning, which meant he had written it Friday night. Which meant he had read her letter, the one where she told him the leaving had cost her something. The one where she said she had not walked away easily, and he had sat down and written back the same day and posted it the next morning, without waiting to see if the words were the right ones. She noticed that. She opened it at the kitchen table before anyone else was down. He had answered her 4 legal questions first clearly, accurately, with the specific information she had asked for, and no elaboration that wasn't relevant. The cooling channel expansion she had recommended in her notes was budgeted for spring. The Dalton contract had been renegotiated again at terms she would approve of. The February production numbers were the strongest the Mercer Dairy had recorded in 5 years. Then, beneath the business, you told me the leaving cost you something. You told me you did not walk away easily. I want you to know that I read those 2 sentences more times than I am going to admit in writing, and that I am not going to make them mean more than you said they meant. Because you were precise, and I intend to respect the precision. But I want to say this. I know what it costs to stay somewhere that is hurting you. I know what it costs to choose yourself when everything around you has been arranged to make that choice feel like selfishness. What you did in October was not easy, and it was not small, and I have never once thought of it as anything except exactly what it was: a woman who had given everything she had, deciding correctly that she was done giving it to someone who had not earned it. I am trying to earn it now. I know that is not a fast process. I know I do not get to decide when it is complete. I just want you to know I am still trying every day. Not because it will get me something, because you are worth the trying. Mabel set the letter down. She picked it back up. She read the last paragraph a 3rd time. Then she put the letter in the hat box under her bed with all the others, and she went downstairs and made the Whitmore's breakfast service run, with the smooth efficiency of a woman who had organized the kitchen so well that it almost ran itself. And she moved through the morning with the particular internal quiet of someone who has received news that is still settling into its full weight and has decided to let it settle at its own pace rather than rushing it toward a conclusion. By Thursday she had decided, not everything, not the large things, but one specific thing that had been sitting at the edge of her thinking since the partnership offer arrived. One thing she had been circling without landing, and she landed it now with the particular relief of a decision that turns out to have been made long before you let yourself know it. She wrote to Gideon that Thursday, and she answered his 4 questions about the partnership articles: yes to the arbitration clause, yes to the buyout provision, yes to the profit definition, yes to the termination terms, and then she wrote, I will accept the partnership, not the living arrangement. Not a change to my current position here, not anything beyond what the articles say. I am accepting the partnership because it is a good offer, cleanly made, and because you built me something with my name on it, and I am not my mother, and I am not going to refuse a good thing, because accepting it feels like vulnerability. My lawyer, I am retaining Gerald Marsh independently. I trust you will not object, will review the final articles, and I will sign when I am satisfied with his review. I expect to be satisfied. I am also going to tell you something that is not about the partnership. I am coming to Briar Hollow in March, not to stay. To inspect the dairy operation as co-principal, which is my right under the articles and which I intend to exercise from the beginning, so there is no ambiguity about the kind of partner I am. I will stay at the Hendersons', Ruth Hadley wrote to me in January and said their spare room is available. And I have already written to confirm it. I will be there the second week of March. I expect the channel expansion to be completed before I arrive. She signed it. She posted it. She sat back and felt the ground shift another inch beneath her. Slow and underneath and undeniable, and she let it shift. March arrived before she was ready for it. The way months did when something important was waiting at the end of them. She had spent February doing 3 things simultaneously with the focused efficiency she applied to everything she cared about. Finalizing the partnership articles with Gerald Marsh, who turned out to be a precise and unruffled man who asked good questions and did not waste her time, writing to Ruth Hadley about the Henderson spare room and finding, in the process, a correspondence that had something easy and sharp and honest in it that she had not expected and was glad to have, and continuing her Thursday letters to Gideon, which had become something she did not have a word for yet, not courtship. Not business, not friendship exactly, but a conversation that had the quality of all 3 without being reducible to any one of them. She signed the partnership articles the last week of February. Gerald Marsh witnessed her signature with the professional neutrality of a man who handled the legal affairs of Briar Hollow's most prominent rancher and had been given very clear instructions about what this particular contract needed he to protect. And she watched him add her name to the company record alongside Gideon's and felt something in her chest go very still and then very certain. Mabel Rowena Pike, Mercer Dairy Operation. She was on the Friday stage to Briar Hollow the second week of March. And she was calm the whole 4 hours in the way she was calm when she had made a decision correctly, and there was nothing left to second guess. She was not calm when the stage pulled into Briar Hollow. She was not falling apart. She was simply aware acutely. Specifically aware of what it meant to return to a place you had left in the dark at 4 in the morning with a suitcase and no guarantee of anything. And to return to it 5 months later with your name on a legal document and your own attorney and a signed contract in your traveling bag. It meant something. She let it mean something. Ruth Hadley met her at the stage stop, which Mabel had not expected and which immediately made her feel better about everything. Ruth was a compact, direct woman of 32, with the kind of face that communicated its owner's opinions without requiring the owner to always speak them. And she shook Mabel's hand with the brisk warmth of someone who had decided they were going to be friends and was simply notifying Mabel of this decision. "You look better than I expected," Ruth said, taking her bag before she could protest. "What did you expect?" Mabel said. "Someone more uncertain," Ruth said. "You look like a woman who knows what she's doing." "I know what I'm doing today," Mabel said. "I'll report on tomorrow when I get there." Ruth laughed, a real one. Quick and unguarded, and Mabel thought that she had been right to trust the correspondence. Some people were the same in person as they were on paper. Ruth Hadley was one of them. "Gideon knows you've arrived," Ruth said, as they walked. "I imagine he's been watching the stage road since noon. It's 2 o'clock, Mabel said. "Yes," Ruth said. Mabel said nothing, but something in her face apparently communicated itself, because Ruth glanced at her sideways and let the subject alone. She had 2 hours at the Henderson house before her scheduled visit to the dairy she had written ahead to Gideon with a precise agenda. Arrival time, inspection scope, what she expected to find and what she would be assessing. Because she was the co-principal and she was conducting this as a business inspection first and everything else second. She changed out of her traveling clothes. She reviewed her notes on the production figures he had sent. She made a list of questions. Ruth brought her tea and sat in the other chair and did not pretend the tea was the reason she was there. "Are you nervous?" Ruth asked. "Yes," Mabel said, without hesitation, which surprised her a little. She was not in the habit of admitting that quickly. "About the dairy or about him?" "The dairy will be fine," Mabel said. "I know what I'm looking at. I know what the numbers should say, and I know what the operation should look like, and I know whether the spring check on the channel was done correctly." She paused. Him I am less certain about. He's changed, Ruth said. People say that. I'm not people, Ruth said with the mild precision of someone who was distinguishing between general assertion and direct observation. I have watched Gideon Mercer for 12 years. Watched him before his wife died and after. And I watched him run that ranch with his jaw set and his books in order and his hands paid and his feelings kept somewhere. Nobody could find them. And I have watched him for the last 5 months do things I did not think he was capable of doing. And I am not saying that because I want you to go back to him. She met Mabel's eyes. I'm saying it because you asked me to be honest with you in January, and I intend to keep that. Mabel looked at her. He corrected the Donahue reference, Ruth said. Mabel went still. You didn't know, Ruth said quietly. He found out I don't know how. Gerald Marsh, probably, in the course of reviewing your employment history for the partnership articles, and he found out what the Donahues had said about you in the reference they gave. And he wrote to every employer in this county who might have seen that reference, and he told them it was false and self-serving and should not be credited. She paused. He did not tell you, because he did not want you to feel like he was making it a gift you owed him something for. The kitchen was very quiet. Mabel put down her teacup. He found the Donahue reference, she said. Yes, and he wrote to correct it. 4 letters. I believe. To the 3 largest households in the county, and to the Domestic Employment Registry in Abilene. Mabel looked at the wall. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the Donahue household and the 6 weeks she had spent in it, and the reference she had known was bad and had carried with her anyway, because she had no power over what a former employer wrote about her, and no recourse and no name on any document that said she was anything other than what other people decided to say she was. She thought about her name on the Mercer Dairy articles of agreement. She thought about a man who had found a false reference in a file he had no obligation to review and had written 4 letters to correct it and had not told her, because he did not want it to be a debt. She pressed her hand flat on the table. He is infuriating, she said. Ruth blinked. He does the right thing, Mabel said. And then he doesn't tell me about it, and I find out sideways. And I cannot. It is very difficult to maintain a careful, measured pace about a person who keeps doing the right thing when nobody is watching, and then genuinely not mentioning it. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she said, Is that a complaint? Mabel looked at her. Is that actually a complaint, Ruth said, or is that the sound of someone who has been careful and measured for 5 months and has run up against something that is making the careful and measured approach feel unnecessary? Mabel was quiet. It is both, she said finally. It can be both, Ruth said. It can. She picked up her tea. You have 45 minutes before your inspection. Finish your tea. The dairy was exactly as she expected and better than she had let herself hope. The channel expansion was complete, clean, correctly installed, with the secondary joint reinforced the way she had specified in her February notes. The cooling process had been modified per her August recommendations and then improved beyond them in 2 places she had not anticipated, which meant someone had been thinking about the problem rather than simply following instructions. The supplier records were organized in the system she had designed and maintained in the system she had designed, which she had not required, and which meant someone had been maintaining it on purpose. The production ledger was open on the work table, every entry dated, every figure accurate. Her name was already in the heading Mercer Dairy Operation. Pike and Mercer, co-principals, in Gideon's cramped, deliberate handwriting. She stood in the dairy and looked at her name in the heading and breathed. Gideon was standing 6 feet away, which was where he had been since she arrived, giving her the inspection without making it about him, answering her questions when she asked them, and staying quiet when she didn't. He had said when she walked in, the channel is done. The secondary joint was your specification. Everything else is in the ledger. And then he had stepped back and let her work. She had been working for 40 minutes. She turned around. He was watching her with the expression she had come to know across 5 months of letters and 4 visits, the one that meant he was paying full attention without requiring her to notice. He had his hat in his hands. He was doing that thing where he waited without performing waiting. "The channel is well done," she said. "Better than my specification." Hank suggested the secondary brace, he said. He said your notes implied it but didn't require it, and he wanted to be sure. He was right to add it, she said. "I'll tell him." She looked at the ledger. She looked at her name. She looked at him. "You corrected the Donahue reference," she said. Something moved through his expression, not surprise, but the particular quality of a man who has been found out doing something he genuinely did not intend as performance, and is therefore uncertain how to receive the acknowledgement. "Ruth," he said. "Yes, I was not trying to. I didn't want it to be debt," she said. "I know. She told me that too." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because it was wrong," he said. "Because someone had put something false into the world about you, and it was affecting your ability to earn what you should be earning. And I had access to the information and the means to correct it, and it needed to be done." He paused. "That is the complete reason. There is no other part of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. "He held yet," she said. Not unkindly, clearly. "I have a few more things to look at in the ledger. Give me another 10 minutes. He gave her the 10 minutes. She spent them looking at the ledger and not looking at the ledger, which was the particular experience of trying to do methodical work when something in your chest has already made a decision that your head is still pretending to consider. She checked the quarterly projections. She reviewed the supplier terms. She verified the accounts were separated correctly. Everything was in order. Everything was in order. She closed the ledger. She stood at the work table with her hand on the closed ledger and thought about 6 empty flour sacks and a cold stove and a stage road in the October dark and 4 hours of riding toward Wichita with $40 in her coat pocket. She thought about the hat box under her bed with its stack of letters and the notebook she had been filling, since November, with the thoughts of a woman learning to trust something slowly. She thought about her mother's hands, precise and tireless, and the loneliness that had lived in the refusal to need anyone. She thought about the last line she had written in her notebook the night before she packed her bag for Briar Hollow. She had written precise work done slowly. That is what this has been. That is what I have been doing. I think I am almost finished with the slow part. She turned around. Gideon was still standing 6 feet away, still holding his hat, still waiting. "I have something to say to you," she said. "And I need you to let me say all of it before you respond." "All right," he said. "I came back to inspect the dairy," she said. "That is the business reason, and it is a real reason, and everything I said about it in my letter was true. But that is not the only reason I came back, and you know it, and I know it, and I am tired of the careful language." She looked at him directly. "I came back because in off of months of letters you have told me the truth about yourself without softening it. And you have let me be angry without trying to manage the anger. And you found a reference that was hurting me and you corrected it and did not tell me. And you wrote me a legal document with my name on it and no strings attached. And you have shown up every time at the distance I set, at the pace I required, and I have run out of reasons to pretend that has not mattered to me." He was very still. "I am not forgiving what happened in the 6 months before October," she said. "I don't think forgiveness is the right word for it. I think the right word is that I understand it, and I understand you. And I understand that you were a man who had convinced himself that keeping people was the same as valuing them, and that you have spent 5 months learning the difference in the specific and uncomfortable way that real learning happens." She paused. "And I think you have learned it." "Mabel," I said, "let me finish," she said. He closed his mouth. "I am not moving back to this ranch," she said. "I am the co-principal of a dairy operation, and I will conduct that role with full professional authority, and I will be in Briar Hollow when the work requires it. That is what the articles say, and that is what I intend. She paused. What happens beyond that is, I am willing to find out what happens beyond that. I am willing to let it be whatever it actually is. Built correctly, without rushing it and without me managing myself into a smaller version of what I feel, 'cause I am afraid of what it means to feel it. The dairy was very quiet. Gideon looked at her with the expression she did not have a word for the one that was not quite what she had seen anywhere else. The one that was specific to him and to this and to 5 months of letters, crossing 50 miles of Kansas prairie in both directions. Can I speak now? Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not composing himself, she had learned the difference between a man composing himself and a man simply thinking. And this was thinking. I don't want you to be a smaller version of anything, he said. He stopped. He started again, plainly. I want to know you for the rest of my life. Not the version of you that is careful and managed and deciding how much to offer. All of it. The part that corrects people's invoices without telling them, and the part that sits in the dark when the lamp runs low, and the part that told me on a stage road in October that I had never once asked what you wanted. His voice was steady. I want to ask every day what you want. I want that to be the practice of it. Every day for the rest of it. Mabel looked at him. She had not cried in this dairy in October when she was leaving, and she was not going to cry in it now. But her throat was doing something specific, and her hands were not as steady as she would have preferred, and she was choosing, consciously, not to manage any of it smaller than it was. You are still holding your hat, she said. He looked down at it. Yes, put it on, she said. You look like you're waiting for a verdict. He put his hat on. Something in his face loosened. Well, he said. Every day, she said. You ask every day, and I answer honestly, and when the answer changes, I tell you. And when I need something different than what we have, I say so. And when you get something wrong because you will get things wrong, Gideon, we say so and we fix it and we don't let it sit unpaid. No unpaid debts, he said. No unpaid debts, she said, of any kind. He crossed the 6 feet between them. He stopped in front of her. He did not reach for her, he waited. The way he had learned to wait, with the patience of a man who understood that some things could not be taken and would only be given. She reached up and straightened the brim of his hat, which was slightly crooked from being held too long. He went very still. There, she said. Then she let her hand stay where it was, at the brim of his hat, and he put his hand over hers. And they stood in the dairy, with the afternoon light coming through, and her name in the ledger heading, and 5 months of letters between them, and the particular quiet of two people who have arrived quite somewhere true. Tobias found out that evening. He did not find out in any dramatic way. He came into the kitchen at supper time and found Mabel at the stove, which she had taken over from Mrs. Garfield for the evening, with that woman's cheerful cooperation. And he stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her. The way he looked at things he needed to verify were real. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where 6 flour sacks had sat in a row 5 months ago, and he picked up his notebook. And he opened it to a new page, and he wrote something. Mabel was watching him from the stove. What are you writing? She said. A new entry, he said. What does it say? He looked up at her. It says Miss Mabel came back. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. That is the only correct way to come back to anywhere. Mabel looked at him for a moment. That is correct, she said. I know, he said, with the serene certainty of a 12-year-old who had been right about something important and was allowing himself to know it. She turned back to the stove. The kitchen was warm. The fire was good. Outside the window, the March prairie was doing what the March prairie did, cold and restless and just beginning to think about spring. Gideon came in from the barn and hung his coat and hat and sat down across from Tobias and looked at the kitchen the way a man looks at a thing he had almost lost and found again. Supper was good. The conversation was easy in the way. Conversation became easy between people who had stopped performing for each other and were simply being. Tobias ate 2 servings and talked about Mr. Garrett and a mathematics problem that had occupied him for a week, and his strong opinion about the territorial surveying dispute that had been in the Briar Hollow paper, which was both better informed and more decided than most adults' opinions on the subject. After supper, Tobias took himself to bed with the particular tactful timing of an 11-year-old. He was going to give the adults the room. Gideon cleared the table. Mabel washed the dishes. This was not assigned. It was simply what happened when 2 people were in a kitchen together, and both of them were the kind of people who did not leave a mess sitting. At some point he was standing beside her, rather than across the kitchen, drying what she washed, and they were talking about the spring planting schedule and the Dalton contract, and whether the February production numbers could be sustained through summer. And it was the most ordinary conversation, and the most complete one. And she was aware of both things simultaneously. "I need to go back to Wichita Monday," she said. "I know," he said. "Mrs. Whitmore needs 2 weeks' notice for any change to my position," she said. "I owe her that. I owe her considerably more than that." Actually, he looked at her. "I'm not leaving the Whitmore immediately," she said. "I am doing this correctly. Everything with proper notice. Proper transition. Proper acknowledgement of every obligation I have made." "Of course," he said. He did not push. He did not suggest a faster timeline. He simply accepted it. "You understand that," she said. Not a question she was verifying. The way she verified things she needed to be certain of. "I understand," he said. "Mabel, I understand." She handed him the last dish. He dried it and set it on the shelf. They stood in the clean kitchen with the fire settling, and the March prairie dark and cold outside, and the lamp making the room warm and particular in theirs. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and you can answer in your own time. You can answer in a letter if you prefer. You can answer in ask," she said. "When you're ready, when everything is done correctly, and all the obligations are properly met, would you be willing to let this be your home? Not the position, not the dairy. Hear this." He looked at her steadily. "With me, the kitchen was quiet." Mabel looked at him. She thought about precise work done slowly. She thought about her name in the ledger. She thought about the hatbox full of letters, and a notebook full of truths, and a boy upstairs who had written everything down because he had decided that what she gave deserved to be recorded. She thought about the last line she had written in her own notebook the night before she came back. "I think I am almost finished with the slow part. I am not answering in 6 months," she said. He waited. "Yes," she said. "When everything is done correctly." Yes. Something moved across his face that she had not seen before, not the careful, controlled expressions of a man managing himself, but the unguarded thing underneath them, the thing that had been there for a long time waiting to be allowed out. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. They married in early September beneath the cottonwoods at the edge of Mercer Ranch. On a morning that was cool and clear and enormous, the way Kansas mornings were in early fall. With Ruth Hadley standing on Mabel's left, and Hank Reardon on Gideon's right, and Tobias in the front, holding the small brown notebook he had started in August of the previous year. The Mercer Dairy had produced its best summer numbers in the county's recorded history. Mabel's name was on every contract, every shipment record, every supplier agreement. When people in Briar Hollow spoke of the Mercer operation now, they said Pike and Mercer in the correct order, because that was the order on the documents, and Gideon had made clear, quietly and once and in the specific way that was more effective than making it clear loudly, that the order on the documents was the order that mattered. At the reception, a practical affair in the ranch house, well-cooked and well-attended Tobias stood up without being asked and read from his notebook. He read the entry from October of the previous year. She left 6 flour sacks and a ledger and walked out before sunrise. I think this was the bravest thing she did, because leaving something wrong takes more courage than staying in it. He read the entry from March. Miss Mabel came back. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. That is the only correct way to come back to anywhere. And then he read the last entry, written that morning. She taught us that being needed is not the same as being valued. She taught us that love without respect is just another name for debt. She taught us that a person who is truly free to leave and chooses to stay is giving you something that cannot be taken or withheld or kept in a locked drawer. It can only be given. Today she gave it, and we knew, all of us, what it cost her, to be sure. The room was quiet. Mabel looked at Tobias across the room full of people, and she did not manage what she felt into something smaller. She let it be the size it was. Years later, after the dairy had expanded twice and Mabel's name had appeared in the county agricultural records as one of the most successful dairy operators in the region, and after Tobias had gone east to study and come back with a law degree and a wife who reminded Mabel pleasantly of herself at 22, and after the cottonwoods beside the ranch had grown another 1.5 feet in the patient way that cottonwoods grew years later. When people asked Mabel how she and Gideon had come to be what they were, she always gave the same answer. She said, "We did it slowly and correctly and with no debt between us." She said, "I came back when I was free to choose it, and not one moment before." She said that is the only way any of it means what it should mean. And it was true. Every word of it was precisely, exactly, completely true. Because on the morning she placed 6 flour sacks on a kitchen table and walked out into the October, dark, with a suitcase in her hand and $30 unpaid and nothing in front of her but the stage road and decision she had made for herself. Mabel Pike had not known how the story would end. She had only known one thing with absolute certainty: that whatever came next, it would be hers. It had always been going to be. And when the cowboy finally came running after her, breathless and hat blown and holding $40 and an expression she did not have a word for, yet she had not run back. She had made him learn what she was worth. And then, when she was good and ready, she had walked back through that door with her name on the deed and her head held high and her eyes wide open. And she had made that ranch into a home on her own terms. Not his. That was the victory. Not that he had come running. That she had finally, completely, and without apology, understood that she did not have to.